So before we get started, just as a show of hands, who here has been in a port or been on a cruise ship? Great, so we all have an idea of where we're headed here. So why do we care about ports? What does that have to do with sustainability, right? Well, for starters, ships are the largest machines on our planet. And the International Maritime Organization did a study that identified shipping as 3% of our global emissions. If we continue with business as usual, by 2050, the maritime industry as a whole will account for over 10% of our greenhouse gases. So that said, let's understand what are the port functions that we're going to be talking about. So it starts with cruise and then goes to cargo for loading and unloading. There's freight and storage handling once you're on port property. Then there's the distribution of goods upland, and then there's maintenance and repair. So from a port standpoint, what is electrification? So we've got all these vessels and vehicles that are on a port, and all these things that move around use up diesel fuel for the most part, some natural gas fuels. But either way, we're looking to replace these fossil fuels with electric power. So how does that relate to sustainability? So we're tapping into our renewable energy resources and reducing our environmental footprint. So I think that's rather apparent. So we're linking all of this together. We're reducing our emissions of air pollutants, and also we're reducing our noise pollution to our surrounding communities. So in a port, what type of opportunities are there for this? So it starts at the large end with cruise and cargo vessels, because those are some of the major contributors. Then it comes down to the cranes that offload these vessels and smaller cranes that handle stacks of containers around the port. And then you've got the top picks and straddle carriers, trucks and yard hustlers that take containers from here to there around the port. And then of course there are forklifts. And last but not least, we have reefers. Now these aren't the reefers that some of you may be thinking of. These are the kind that plug in, and it's basically a refrigerated container that keep our perishables in good condition. So how do we go about this? Well, let's start with the hybrid approach. So a lot of us are familiar with hybrid vehicles. Well, a lot of these work the same way. The difference might be where a lot of these devices, their engines don't necessarily have enough activity during the day to fully charge the batteries. So we put in electrified charging stations to take care of these vessels overnight so they can get their recharge. On the fully electric side, you can take things like cruise and cargo ships that don't move around a lot. They come to berth and stay there. They can turn their engines off and plug in with shore power. Then we've got the large cranes that have a limited path that can also plug in and stay plugged in. And then there are the trucks and yard hustlers and shuttle carriers that run around the port carrying containers from here to there. Those guys have quick chargers that can be fully dependent on batteries and do whatever they need to go. And then again, last but not least, we've got reefers where you put in a plug-in station. We can do densified stacks, turn off all generators on site, and all these reefers are now plugged into the electric grid. So how does this link to supporting renewable energy? So what I'd like to do is share some projects that I've worked on and my team. And I'd like to start with Dominion Portsmouth Marine Terminal. So here we did the master plan for a landside staging site that basically handles the offshore wind farm. So you might say to yourself, well, what does the port have to do with an offshore wind farm? So what they need to do is bring all these large components onto the port property. They stage them, they test them, we do some manufacturing there, and then we assemble them and put them on jack-up barges to get them back out to sea for installation. So how do we go about electrifying this? So the obvious big one is the delivery and installation vessels. So we plug those in with shore power. Then we have electrification components for the testing and the obvious support for the administration buildings, the manufacturing buildings, and of course there's illumination for the site for nighttime operations. So what we've been hearing about also throughout this conference, here and there, has been digital twin technology. So here we had the opportunity to use this as it applies to the Esbjerg Danish seaport. This is the largest throughput port for offshore wind farm staging components in the world. By using digital twin technology, we were able to increase their efficiency and triple their throughput from 1.5 gigawatts all the way up to 4.5. How did we do this? We developed a one-to-one simulation of their processes and operations and identified efficiencies and inefficiencies. This allowed the client, with our assistance of course, to analyze all of these operations and maximize these efficiencies before any capital improvements were put into place. So some additional examples that I'd like to go through with you would start with the Port of Palm Beach. Here we did a full master plan of electrification starting all the way from water's edge going upland. We did shore power for cruise and cargo ships, electrification for all the cranes, yard hustlers, shuttle carriers, commercial and personal vehicles, all the way up to an electric locomotive that would distribute goods upland. The next one, Port of Tacoma, is out in Washington. And here we actually did the construction documents that are going to be going into construction soon. And this one's a bit near and dear to me because what really sticks out is this recollection that I have of when I went to go visit the site and I'm walking around this cargo port and I'm looking at all these ships lined up and the smoke is bellowing into the air and all these cranes and trucks running around the site, burning all this diesel fuel, and recognizing that by doing the electrification, we get to eliminate all of that. So here too, we did full electrification. We get to plug in the cargo ships. We get to plug in the cranes. And aside from charging stations for the smaller vehicles, what we got to do here was increase their throughput of refrigeration containers, increasing it from just a few hundred containers using densification and electrification. We bumped it up to over 1,200. And this is going to be all without any fossil fuels burning. And last but not least, we have Port Everglades down in South Florida, where we did a master plan for cruise ship shore power. So here, we identified the opportunities and planned it for 8 of their cruise terminals to have full shore power. And when you look at all the different ships that come into these 8 terminals, we get to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 25%. That's equivalent to taking 2,500 cars off the road every single year. So with that, I'd like to just share a little bit about Moffatt and Nichol. We're a global engineering consulting firm that we service clients worldwide in the port, maritime, and coastal environments. We have over 45 offices, and we've been around since 1945. And a fun feather in our cap is that we were recently voted by Engineering News Record as the #1 design firm in ports and marine environments. And with that, I thank you and welcome any questions for once we're done with our fellow presenters.